Thank you for tutoring with Literacy Network. This training will talk about working with your beginning level learner. Getting started. I think the most important thing for successful classes with your beginning level learner is planning for success. So first of all, you want to find out what are your learners' goals? What are the concrete things they want to be able to do with English or need to be able to do right now? So is that ask a question at the grocery store? Is it talk to a parent or a child's teacher? Request time off from a supervisor? So what does your student need to do now? You also want to know where your learner is using English. Do they use it at work? Do they use it at the store? Do their children speak English? Ask your learner where they speak English. This can be difficult with a beginning level learner, so you may think of showing some pictures, picture of a grocery store, picture of a school, church, the place that they work, and asking them to point to the places that they do speak English now, and then where they would like to be able to speak English in the future. Another really important part of planning for success with your beginning level student is controlling the scope of your lesson. It's very easy to want to give a lot of background on a grammar point or very thorough answers to a question, but the idea is that we want to focus on concrete tasks with your beginning level learner. So if a learner asks a question that you haven't gotten to yet, you may not want to take a lot of the lesson to answer the question. You may try to answer it quickly and then say, we'll get to that later. But really what your learner needs is a focused lesson. So for example, if you want to introduce the verb tense to be, the present tense to be, think about where your learner needs to use that right now. So maybe they need to ask, where is the post office? The post office is on 5th Street. So what you would want to do is introduce the verb to be in that context and then offer a lot of hands-on authentic practice. So very focused, very repetitive, and you're not giving a lot of background or details on the grammar concept itself. You're really focusing on the concrete task. With the beginning level students, you really need to focus your lesson on what does the learner need to know now. When the learner's mastered those basics, you can get into more, you can deviate more easily, but these first few lessons, you really need to just work on mastery at the basics. Repetition is very, very important. A lot of times student or tutors feel like, I may be condescending or maybe I'm boring my student. That's not the case. Think about when you learned a new language, you wanted people to repeat it. It's hard to catch on right away, especially when you're a beginner, because you're not listening to the language in parts. You're hearing a string of language. So it really requires repetition and slow speech, fast speech, so repetition varying the speed to be able to distinguish the parts of the language. So don't worry about condescending. Don't worry about boring your student. Repeat, repeat, repeat. You can find different ways to repeat. So if you're, going back to the using to be to ask for directions, you can ask for directions first and your learner can get the answer. Then your learner can ask for directions. You can show pictures and think about what the people in the pictures are saying. So you can offer different contexts while repeating the same skill. I think one of the most difficult things in working with beginning students may be giving them the time they need to process and speak. It feels awkward sometimes to ask a question and then wait and wait. It's our natural inclination to want to help or to grab the pencil and fill in the blank for the student because it's uncomfortable to see somebody struggling. Try to resist that. Beginners need to be given the time to process what they've heard, formulate the answer, and then prepare to speak it. So allow your student to do that. Make sure that your student knows that you expect him or her to take time to process and formulate answers. Most often, the learner's level of comfort during a lesson will really depend on on your level of comfort. So if you allow your student that time, your student will take it and will feel comfortable doing so. Another difficult thing working with beginning level students can be gauging understanding. Very often beginners will use coping mechanisms and they'll, okay, and you don't know, do they really understand? Do they not understand? What you want to definitely do is avoid the questions, do you understand, or does that make sense? They really serve no purpose because you almost always will get an affirmative yes. What you want to do instead is try to see if your learner understands. So ask your learner to complete a task. Show them an activity and ask them to use the appropriate language. That will show you if they understood. You can also use teach back, and teach back is when you give information and then you ask the person that's listening to explain the information in their own words. So for example, if you're talking about practicing the present tense and you talk about a schedule, you can say a schedule first, and then you can ask the learner to repeat the schedule back. Okay, so I want to make sure that you understood. What do I do on Tuesdays? What do I do on Wednesdays? That will really show you whether your student understood. Another idea is to use open-ended questions. So instead of do you understand, you may want to say, what do I do on Tuesdays? What do I do on Wednesdays? Or if you're talking about giving and receiving directions, going back to our previous example, where is the post office? And allowing your student the time they need to formulate an answer. That's really the best way to know whether your student is understanding or not. So I highly encourage you to stay away from the questions, do you understand and does that make sense? And focus more on giving tasks to your student to see whether or not they can use the language you've just introduced. Speaking. Speaking is one of the most important skills that you'll work on with your beginning level student. Many students might not be reading and writing a whole lot right now, but they are speaking a lot. They're listening to their supervisor. They're asking for a product at the grocery store. They're listening to messages from their child's teacher. So speaking is one of the first things that we want to focus on with our beginning level students. I really like to use conversation as a means to practice grammar. So going back to the example we covered before, using the verb to be and giving and receiving instruction or directions, try to have a focused conversation on that topic. So you may bring a clear map of the neighborhood. And without any scripts, sit down and talk with your student about the map. Oh, where is your house? Where's the post office? Where's the closest grocery store? And you're not using scripts. You're just speaking with your student. Another thing to keep in mind when you're using conversation to practice grammar is you really want to know what your focus is. Is your focus a means to build fluency and develop a relationship, or is it to improve accuracy? So if it's to build fluency, to build confidence, then you really just want to talk. You only want to correct the errors that change meaning. But other than that, you just want to let your learner talk. If you are using conversation to build accuracy, then you want to correct the errors that directly relate to the grammar you're focusing on. So in this case, it would be the verb to be. So if the learner says, the post office are in 5th Street, the error that you would correct is the post office is. You wouldn't really talk about in 5th Street right now. You'd want to focus on one error that you're routinely correcting, and that's the error, the concept that you're focusing your lesson on. Remember to stick with appropriate topics with your beginner. They may not be able to talk about a lot of fascinating, broad themes right now. So even if it seems monotonous or it seems to get a little boring for you, make sure that the topics that you're bringing into conversation are topics that your learner's familiar with. If you try to bring in too much, if you broaden that scope, your learner isn't going to be building the confidence that they need to be improving. They're going to be feeling frustrated or like they're not learning. So it's very, very important to control the scope and to make sure that even impromptu conversation is appropriate to the skills that your learner does have. Getting your beginning learner talking can be difficult. So I recommend pictures, having your learner bring in personal pictures. Everybody likes to talk about themselves. So going on that. Find out what your learner is interested in. Do they like to play soccer? Or do they like to cook? Bring in magazines that have vivid pictures of a soccer player, pictures of delicious looking food. So really find out what motivates your student. I like the pictures because pictures are very multi-level. A beginning level student can look at a picture of food and they can pick out what they know, and you can branch out a little bit to expand vocabulary, but it can still be a very controlled conversation. So I highly recommend that. One way to encourage your student might be for you to bring a picture of your family or something that's important to you, and you can explain the picture, and then your student can do the same. Another way that I really like to practice speaking with all levels of students, but especially beginners, are dialogues. I like dialogues because it teaches the appropriate conversation within a given situation. So, for example, if you want to practice calling your child in sick or making a clinic appointment, what I do first is write out a very simple dialogue. You want to make sure that the sentences are pretty short. So for example, if it's calling a clinic, I might say, receptionist, thank you for calling group health. How can I help you? Patient, I need to make an appointment with the doctor. Receptionist, great. What is your member number? So they're very short sentences and phrases that you will commonly hear. That's the focus, is what phrases in this situation, what phrases, which words, which questions will you commonly hear. When I use dialogues, I really like to first have the student just listen, either to myself reading the dialogue or to a recording. And I don't give the student a copy of the dialogue, I just have them listen first. Maybe once, maybe twice, and then ask some oral comprehension questions. Then I like to play the dialogue again and give the student a copy of the written dialogue so they can follow along. I like to read through it a lot. So first I'm the receptionist and the student is the patient, and we read through the dialogue. Then we switch roles. Then maybe we'll listen to it again, because remember, what you're really aiming to do is to help your beginning level student hear the parts of language. So it's not just one string of English. And repetitive listening and in working with these dialogues really does that. You can go further, and you can give your student another dialogue that's similar to the first one with some words missing, and you and your student can fill in the missing words to complete the dialogue appropriately. After some time working with this dialogue, you could give your learner a situation, and you could write a dialogue together with your learner. One thing that I found students like, especially in these dialogues that are very common, so calling your child in sick, calling to make an appointment with the clinic, is we write the dialogue together, practice it a couple of times, and then read it together while we record on the student's smartphone, and then they can later listen to it. I had one student say that he listened to the recording before he called the clinic to make the appointment. So one nice way to have students practice what you're doing in class, outside of class, in very useful, authentic ways. We get a lot of questions about pronunciation, so I want to focus a little bit on this. You have to really answer the question, what is the goal of teaching pronunciation? For the beginning level students especially, it is not that they will speak English like you or that they will sound like you. The goal is that people will be able to understand them. That's the goal. So it's good to talk with your students about what pronunciation is. When you learn pronunciation as an adult, you're actually retraining the muscles in your mouth. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of repetition and a lot of practice. It's not a quick 15 minutes in the lesson and you've mastered the TH. So I like to talk to my students about where their tongue and their lips are for certain sounds. So for example, trickiest sounds, I think, especially for Spanish speakers, the Y and the J. So I will write yellow and jello on the board, and I'll say, okay, the first one, yellow, yeah. This is your tongue, Okay? The back of your tongue needs to go up, yeah, 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 against the top of your mouth. Yellow, yellow, yellow. The bottom of the front of your tongue is actually touching your bottom teeth. Yellow, yellow. Then I'll point to the word jello, jello, jello. The tip of your tongue is going up, jello, and touching the front, the top teeth. So the tip of your tongue is up, touching the front teeth. Jello, jello, jello. I really like to give students a mirror so that they can look at themselves while they say yellow, jello, especially the B and the V. They can look at themselves in the mirror. If they don't see their teeth, V, V. If they don't see their teeth, they're not saying V, they're saying B. And like I said, it takes a lot of repetition. You are retraining muscles. You may choose a sound, the ya and the ja, that you want to focus on, and may do 15 minutes of every lesson on that sound and ask students to practice at home in front of the mirror. But it is, it will take time. I like to focus my lessons on pronunciation on what, with the particular student, what makes understanding difficult. So I will get to know the student, and then I'll find out what they particularly have trouble saying, and if I weren't a teacher, would I have trouble understanding them? And then we focus on those areas. So really making sure that the pronunciation work that we do in class is improving, making sure that other people in the community can understand the student well. But I'm not focusing a whole lot on if they're saying everything perfectly, or as if they were native English speakers. Another important thing to think about in pronunciation is intonation and cadence. So the end of a question in English, goes up a little bit. Things like that you can work on as well. Listening. All right, listening. When I was learning Spanish, I thought listening was the hardest skill to master. Like we've been talking about, beginning level language learners often hear the language in a string, and our mission is to help them to hear the different parts of the language. So we want to focus a lot on phonics. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, and the individual sounds, word parts, words, and sentences. Again, I really like to use dialogues for this. So I think that listening to a dialogue over and over again, listening and reading the parts along while you're listening, filling in missing words or filling in missing phrases. So you would give the student a dialogue that's incomplete. They would need to listen to the full dialogue and fill in the words or the phrases that are missing. That really helps students to listen for certain parts of the language. I like using recorded dialogues in my classes, and I ask different people in the office to record them so students get a chance to listen to different people, not just you. And I like to integrate colloquial language. I like to vary the speed, so to really make dialogues authentic while always remembering to focus the lesson, to control the scope. So we want to prepare through the dialogues. We want to prepare students to understand the language that they really will hear in the community in a way that's not frustrating. So you may start with a very basic dialogue, and you may stick with the theme, calling the clinic, for a while, but every week your dialogue becomes a little bit more difficult, a little bit longer. I also think that for improving listening comprehension, listening for a purpose or listening for a concrete task is really helpful. So you may record or dictate some directions, and you may ask the student to follow along. Have the student listen to a voicemail or an outgoing message. Everywhere they call right now, the clinic, the post office, anywhere they call, it'll be a recorded message. And so practicing that skill is really helpful in their daily lives. But you always want to make sure you're asking your student to do something, because then you'll very clearly see what they understood and what they didn't understand. And it's giving your learner the practice for listening for the information they need. So it will be a long time before your beginning level student understands everything. But what you want to do is equip him or her to listen to speech in the community, and find the pieces of information that they need. And that's through a lot of practice. All right, vocabulary. Building vocabulary is obviously one of the keys to your lessons with your beginning level student. I want to talk first about why we don't recommend translating in your lessons. The way that adults learn, well, actually, if you think about the way children learn a language, it's not through translation. They learn the language through doing, through living the language. It's really the best way to learn a language. For adults, it's more difficult and it's more time consuming, but it's really the best way. So instead of translating, if you translate, think about if you were to read a list of 15 words and you read the word in English and you read the word in Chinese. After going away from that list, you're probably not going to remember many, if any, of those words because you didn't work to learn them. You just translated them. It didn't cost you anything. Your mind didn't have to make switches or bring in pictures to understand the word. So we really want to focus away from translation, and we want to introduce words to your learners so that they will recall them later. The best way to do that is to limit the amount of words. So really, research shows 5 to 10 words per lesson is really what a person can retain. So stick to the 5 to 10 new words a lesson. The best way to introduce them is to illustrate them, to show. If you're in the kitchen, you want to introduce some vocabulary in the kitchen, bring in the items to your lesson. Bring measuring cups, bring a cup, bring a plate. Show your student what the word is. Act it out if you're introducing a new verb. I found that students love the game charades. It's a fun game. It's a fun way to learn English. It's not stressful, but it also really makes you remember the word. So I really recommend that when you introduce new words, you're showing with illustrations, with acting, with the actual item. You're showing your learner what the word means. Then you want to offer a lot of authentic practice using the word. So if you are practicing kitchen utensils, bring the utensils to class. Lay them out on a table. Talk about, a spatula, ladle, wooden spoon. Tell your learner what the words are, and then practice a lot. So your learner can sit in front of the table and you can say, grab the wooden spoon. Put the wooden spoon next to the spatula. Grab the measuring cup. Put the measuring cup next to the spatula. So you're giving very short, very concrete instructions, and your learner is increasing their automaticity. So they're listening to the word, and as you go, you'll see that they're picking up the items more quickly because they're becoming more automatic in connecting the word with the item. Then ask your student to give you instructions, to tell you, okay, pick up the spoon, put it next to the ladle. Also, if you're practicing, commands, stop, go, you may want to bring in pictures of road signs. And I've done really fun lessons on giving my student a little matchbox car and showing a road sign, and they'll move their car or stop their car accordingly. So really, just to recap a little bit, when you're introducing vocabulary to your beginning level student, try not to translate. Try to choose 5 to 10 words that you're going to introduce, and spend a couple lessons on those 5 to 10 words. Introduce them in concrete ways, so acting them out, showing the actual item, drawing, really illustrate the word for your student, and then give your student a lot of practice, authentic ways to use the new vocabulary words. And again, we want to focus on repetition here. You want your student to automatically be able to use those words, and that's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of practice. Grammar. All right. So grammar will obviously be another component of your lessons. And the grammar that we want to focus on with beginning level students is really communicative. So again, going back to those questions, where does my student use English right now? Who do they speak with? And you're going to want to tailor grammar lessons to the answers of those questions. So if you're thinking about, let's see, the past tense, where does your student use the past tense? Do they need to describe accidents that happened at work? Do they need to, they're thinking about where they will actually use the skill and who they'll be speaking with, and then introducing the grammar in that way. I don't ever really bring up past tense or participle, any grammar words. I usually leave those out, and I introduce the new grammar we're going to study with an example. So maybe a recorded dialogue or a video or a story, and I'll get the student involved in that before they even really know that they're learning a new grammar concept. So ask yourself first, where is your student going to use the grammar that I'm teaching today, and what task will they complete? So what are they going to be doing with the grammar? And then make sure that you're focusing your lessons on that. Another tricky part with a grammar lesson, it's very easy for teachers and tutors to do most of the talking, but actually we want the opposite. We really want students to do the majority of the talking during a grammar section of a lesson. So your job is really to introduce the concept. You can maybe give a very simple chart. I am, you are, he, she, it is. So a simple written chart. But you want the student to be producing the language throughout the entire lesson. So you really want the student talking more than you during grammar sections. So when I introduce a new grammar concept, I'll introduce the situation. So I'm lost. I need to ask for directions. Where is the post office? Where is the school? Then I'll hand out a very simple grammar chart. I don't give a lot of explanations, so I'll try not to explain the grammar in a detailed manner, but I'll try more to use the grammar. And then we'll focus most of the grammar lesson actually using it. My student and I will act through scenarios, things like that, to use the grammar. So within your grammar lesson, you want to make sure that you have two focuses. You want to focus on improving accuracy and then improving fluency. So when you work on improving accuracy, you want to make sure that the pronoun is correct, the verb form is correct, that the grammar is correctly used. You can definitely use worksheets for this. Try to think beyond worksheets. Try to use pictures or props or dialogues to do the same thing that a worksheet would do. Make sure that the grammar form is correct, but a little bit more authentic. So for example, maybe you want to give a map, like we've been talking about, and you're really focusing on where is the post office. Your student says the post office is next to the school. You want to make sure that those answers and questions are perfect. So you will correct mistakes with regard to the grammar you're studying. If you want to help your student improve fluency using the grammar, that's going to be a little bit different. You want to offer authentic use of the grammar concept. So maybe you ask your student to take a picture of their street, or take a picture of their favorite place in Madison. And they bring the picture and you take a look at it and you say, oh great, so where is your favorite place? Where's the ice cream shop? Where's your child's school? And then you're really just conversing. You're not correcting mistakes that don't affect meaning. So you're still giving your student very valuable practice using the grammar concept you introduced, but you're not correcting everything. And this really allows your student to branch out a little bit, to build more confidence in speaking. And even if they're making mistakes, they are growing. Their language skills are growing through this. I love role plays for increasing fluency. I love them. So what I do a lot is I will have a situation and we take turns choosing the situation. So for example, you are lost. You must find the grocery store. And we take turns being the person who's lost and the person who's helping. This can work in any grammar concept you're studying, a variety of different situations, and it offers very authentic practice in a safe a safe place. You know, your lessons with your learner are probably the safest place that they will speak English. So really giving them the opportunity to practice real language with you is preparing them for doing, you know, for having success when talking with community members. Right. Reading. When you focus on reading in your lessons, with your beginning student, you want to make, again, the class is very concrete. So you want to focus on reading to do. What does your learner read right now? This may not be very extensive articles or books. It may be reading road signs, grocery store ads, the Literacy Network class schedule, children's books. And you can ask your learner what do they read? And again, that can be tricky with a beginning level student, so I recommend getting some pictures and having your student point to the things that they currently read. Okay, when you are focusing on reading, again, you want to give a task. And I think it's really nice to have them, you know, to use reading to reinforce the grammar and the vocabulary that you're introducing in your lesson. So, for example, if we are studying, you know, we've been talking about the example of where is the post office? The post office is next to the school. A reading task would maybe be printing out some instructions, some directions, giving your student a map and a car, and having them read instructions and follow the instructions with their car. That way you will see exactly what they understand and what they don't understand. And this is a skill that they really will follow outside of class. You know, you want to see those tangible outcomes, because it can be difficult to know what your student is understanding and not, especially if they're reading in their head. One thing I really like to do when I'm studying basic medicine labels, so I like to bring colored water and all of the tools you can use for medicine or for measuring medicine for kids. So the syringes, the little spoon the measuring part is in the bottom, anything that you can find. And then I have the student silently read the medicine labels and measure out the liquid. This is a good thing too, because it teaches students how important measuring accurately is. So I really like to look for those skills that will practice very, very concrete, authentic reading that will affect their daily lives. One of the trickiest parts in teaching ELL students, English language students, to read is that many students get hung up on every word. If they don't understand every word, they stop. They can't get past the word they don't understand. So our job is to teach students, like we talked about with listening comprehension, to teach students how to listen to a block of information or read a block of information and find the information that they need, even though they don't understand everything. So teaching how to skim for pertinent information. So if you've got this medicine label, tell your student, dose. I just want to know, what is the dose? How much medicine? And your student needs to look for the word dose. They can ignore everything else. But that's a skill that many students need to learn. Also, something really great is to teach prefixes and suffixes. That helps a lot if you know that pre always means before. It makes difficult words easier to understand. So I think I would focus a lot on that, on teaching your student to look at a block of text and to read for the information that they need. That's a very useful skill in their daily lives. Writing. Writing is, for many students, the most difficult skill to master. Writing in English is pretty tricky. So with our beginning level students, we want to start with the letters and the numbers. And where they're going to need that skill the most is addresses. So their address. Are they able to dictate the spelling of their name when they make a clinic appointment? Are they able to dictate the street name that they live on? So a lot of practice with that. I like to go through the phone book and dictate to my students addresses and names, and they fill out envelopes. So they're also studying the correct format of an envelope. I like to also use appointment slips. So I'll give them appointment slips that aren't filled out completely, and they'll listen to recordings on different people and the appointments that they have, a clinic appointment, dental appointment, job interview appointment. And so you're writing the name, the time, the date, and then the address. And then having them dictate to you information. And if your student dictates to you, make sure that you write exactly what the student says, because that gives the student, then the student is able to see their error. Oh, I thought I said 7 and I said 6. They're able to really see the error, and then it'll drive it home a little bit more. As I mentioned earlier, I like to focus a lot on phonics with beginning level students. Actually, any level students. Phonics are pretty important. Always start with the short vowels. So that's the a, I, sounds. The a is the most common in speech, so I generally start with that. I like to have a magnetic board and then bring in magnetic tiles to show students that if you have CAT, it's cat. If you have CAD, it's cad. That a always stays the same. The short sound is always a. And it builds automaticity too. If you're moving the consonants on either side, students are getting more practice saying the a, and they're going to be able to read it and understand it more quickly. So I like to do that a lot, focusing a lot on minimal pairs. So cat, cad, words that sound similar, use the same vowel but have different consonants. I also use dictation. So I'll dictate a word and have the students write it, or I'll dictate a sentence or a phrase. And then I always ask the student to dictate to me, because that's a great lesson in pronunciation, and then students can see where their errors are. When you're working with spelling, I would really, for beginning level students, I'd really only use, bring in spelling as it relates to your grammar lesson or your vocabulary. So if you're studying the past tense, make sure that all of the ED spellings are correct. You may want to do contractions. The irregular past tense verbs are kind of tricky to spell sometimes, so you may focus on that. But using spelling should really reinforce the grammar lesson or the vocabulary lesson. And again, when you're practicing writing, where does your student write? Where do they write? Who are they writing to? What are they writing for? And all of your lessons should really center around that. So you may have them write a note to their teacher, a time off request. A lot of our students really need to be able to write maintenance requests to their landlords. So find that out and teach your student how to write that. It's giving your student a way to use English right away that's beneficial. It builds confidence. It builds, your student is becoming more independent when they're able to do tasks like that. So that's what we want to focus on in our classes. I look forward to seeing you at the day 2 of our training. If you have any questions about this training, feel free to ask during the second day of our training. Thank you very much.